Hi there, I want to talk about lenses. And the lens on the camera is in some ways the most important part of the camera because in large part it determines the quality of your image. Uh, so the purpose of the lens is to focus the light entering the camera. You can use a camera without a lens and it will still, or some of them will still function and allow light into the camera and the shutter works and so on. But the image that you get will be out of focus. In fact, you will likely not be able to tell anything about it except maybe areas of light and shadow. So the lens is made up of multiple elements or pieces of ground glass that are designed to work together to focus the light entering the camera. Lenses come in different lengths, and I want to talk about the different types and lengths of lenses. So let me share the screen just a moment. So lenses are described by what's called their focal lengths, or the focal length of the lens. And the focal length of the lens is not the physical length of the barrel of the lens, but the distance between 2 points, one of which is located in the lens and the other of which is located in the body of the camera. So the first point located in the lens is called the nodal point, and it is the optical center of the lens. That is the point at which light is focused within the lens. So the light enters the lens, it crisscrosses, and is then projected back into the body of the camera, where it is eventually intercepted by the film or the sensor. And the distance between those 2 points, the nodal point and the sensor film plane, is called the focal length of the lens. And that length can be really short or really long. And the focal lengths are always described in the metric system, in millimeters, rather than in the imperial or English system. So, lenses fall into three main categories based on how long or short they are. And the first category is called normal. And they're called normal lenses not because they are like all others, but because they approximate the angle of view, that is the amount of information, the angle of view of that of the normal human eye, plus or minus a certain amount of peripheral vision, and assuming that the human eye is functioning relatively normally. So when you look out into the world, you have a field of view in front of you, or a field of vision, and the central portion of that field of vision is the main part of what you see. It doesn't include the peripheral information. And so normal lenses give you an angle of view that approximates that portion of your field of vision. The longest of the normal lenses are about 63 millimeters, and then they decrease in focal length from there down to 50, and the shortest of the normal lenses are 35 millimeters. 50 millimeter lenses, which is the type of lens that was on this camera, were in the past the most commonly seen normal lenses. So in the past, when you went to buy a camera and it came with a lens, this is the lens it came with, a 50 millimeter lens. These days, most cameras come with something called a zoom lens, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But in the past, 50 millimeters were the most commonly seen lenses. Again, there are shorter and longer normal lenses. The shortest is a 35 millimeter lens, not to be confused with 35 millimeter photography, which refers to the format and the size of the film that's used in the camera, and that size has been carried over to digital photography. 35 millimeter lenses have a focal length of 35 millimeters. The next category of lenses is called wide angle, and these lenses are shorter than normal lenses and have a wider angle of view so that you can see more information. So the shorter the focal length of the lens, the wider the angle of view, and the longer the focal length, the narrower the angle of view. So again, wide angle lenses are shorter than normal lenses, and they have an angle of view that is wider or greater than that of the normal human eye. So very short lenses, very, very short lenses, can give you an angle of view that might be almost a straight line, 180 degrees. So if you've ever seen an image of maybe a room full of people, and at the edges of the frame, people look kind of stretched out like that. That image was made with a wide angle lens, a very wide angle lens, and that stretching out that you see at the edges of the frame is caused by the wide angle nature of the lens, and what you're seeing is something called barrel distortion, where the edges of the frame show the distortion of the light that comes through the lens. And so the wider the angle of view, the shorter the lens, the more barrel distortion you'll see. So it's called that because barrels are convex, they bulge out, and that's sort of what happens to the light. There are specialty lenses. So for example, fisheye lenses are a certain type of wide-angle lenses, and they're called that for two reasons. First, because they kind of look like fish eyes, they bulge out, but also because they give such an incredibly wide angle of view. So fish eyes are more on the sides of their heads, and this gives them an angle of view that comes all the way around, so from almost behind their heads to in front of their heads. And so fisheye lenses also give an incredibly wide angle of view. They also give an incredible amount of distortion. So some people really love the effect of that extreme distortion and stretching out of information. Other people really don't like that effect. So that's one of the things that will determine the kind of lens that you use, the effects that you like, and also the types of images that you want to make. The third category of lenses is called telephoto. And telephoto lenses are longer than normal lenses and have an angle of view that is narrower than those found on normal lenses. So telephoto lenses start at about 70 millimeters, and then they get longer and longer. The effect of the telephoto lens is to isolate a small area or portion of the amount of information in front of you. So if you're photographing a group of people in a room and you just want one person in your frame, you can make an image of the room with a normal or wide angle lens, but then that subject will just be one part of a greater image, and you'll have to crop the image to isolate that person. With a telephoto lens, with a narrower angle of view, you can isolate that person from all of the other information and just make an image of that person. And so the longer the lens, the narrower the angle of view, and the more you can isolate a small spot in your overall field of view or of vision. So again, telephoto lenses start at about 70 millimeters and then they get longer and longer. And I've put down some of the more commonly seen focal lengths here. So a 1000 millimeter lens, for example, has a 2.5 degree angle of view, which is minuscule compared to the 180 degree angle of view that you might find on a fisheye lens. And of course, these lenses physically get longer and longer as well. So many of them require stabilization and have their own mounts for tripods or monopods. Because if you just put the camera body on a tripod or monopod, it would probably just fall over. But it would also put a lot of stress on the connection between the lens and the body. So images that you see of, for example, sports figures, maybe Rafael Nadal serving a tennis at a tennis match, and you can see, the sweat dripping off of him. Obviously, the photographer was not actually on court photographing Rafa from below, but was at quite a distance away from, off the court with the rest of the members of the press, using a really long lens to isolate Rafa or whoever, whomever, from all of the other stuff going on from that you can see from that distance. Wildlife photography. So images of Bengal tigers photographed in the Sundarbans in India, where you can, close up see the beautiful hairs on the tiger's nose and so on. Well, if the photographer had actually been right there in the, in the tiger's face, that would probably have been the last photograph that photographer ever made, which might be a nice legacy. But anyway, the photographer was probably not right there in front of the tiger, but at a very safe distance behind a blind using a really long lens. So again, the type of photography that you do, that you want to do, will determine the kind of lens that you end up using. And that doesn't mean that you have to choose one kind of lens and never use anything else, obviously. But if you tend to do street photography or covering news events of some sort, you may tend to use a shorter lens that gives a wider angle of view so that you can record more information. If your type of photography is something where you're photographing things that you can't physically come in close to, wildlife, sports, other subjects, then you might tend to use a longer lens. Which brings me to the subcategory of lenses, zoom lenses. Zoom lenses incorporate many focal lengths into one lens. And so they're very, very convenient because you can, as you can see here, I've given some examples of different configurations, but you can buy one or two lenses and those will give you a multitude of focal lengths. So if you have a couple of zoom lenses, maybe a 35 or 18 to 55, and then a 35 to 105 or 100 to 300, you have lenses that will give you wide angles of view. You have lenses that will give you narrow angles of view, very long telephoto lenses, all incorporated into one or two lenses. So you don't have to buy one, two, or four, or 10, or 200 different fixed focal length lenses. You have this nice zoom lens that, that can be shorter or longer, depending on the type of image that you want to make. So you can save a lot of money and a lot of time also uh, by not having to swap out all of these lenses. So, of course, there are drawbacks. And the first is that these lenses are rarely as sharp as their fixed focal length counterparts. Not that they are bad lenses, uh, some of them are excellent. But if you compare them side by side, you can see that that the images made with zoom lenses are generally not quite as sharp as those made with fixed focal length lenses. The second disadvantage is that something called the maximum aperture, that is how large the aperture, which is located in the lens, will open, is not as large on zoom lenses as it can be on fixed focal length lenses. And that's called the speed of the lens because it refers somewhat indirectly to the maximum shutter speed you can make use of. And it is desirable to have a larger maximum aperture. And unless you spend thousands of dollars on a lens, on a zoom lens, that is, you will not have a maximum aperture that is as great or as large. That said, zoom lenses, there are many excellent zoom lenses, including the zoom lenses that come with cameras, the kit lenses. And so many people find the trade-off to be worth it. The fact that the zoom lenses are not quite as sharp and not quite as fast. They're still cheaper than buying many different lenses and much more convenient. So those are the four categories, I guess, main categories of lenses: normal, wide angle, and telephoto, and then zoom lenses, which incorporate many focal lengths into one lens. Okay.